You're listening to the Untitled Car Show in partnership with RightFootDown.com. Visit Right Foot Down for your daily automotive fix. If you enjoyed today's program, please tell a friend. It's the best way to support this show. If you want to visit the archives, go to YouTube and search for Untitled Car Show. That'll bring you to the archived episodes. If you want to follow this show, just search for Untitled Car Show on Twitter, Facebook, or Instagram. You can always send an email to the show at untitledcarshow@rightfootdown.com. We're so glad you decided to spend the next hour or so with us. Without further ado, let's get into today's program. Tonight's guest on the Untitled Car Show is Luke Willson. He is the I asked this before, but he is the co-founder of Four Pistons Racing. Luke, how are you doing this evening?
Good. How are you?
I'm doing very well. So is that correct? I spoke a little off the cuff there. You were one of the founding members of Four Pistons?
Yes, absolutely. I started the business with a good friend of mine named Josh Klein. And
I guess what we should tell people right off the bat is maybe if they don't know, Four Pistons Racing is a engine, I don't know, would you call it a manufacturer, a refiner, a magic wizard makers? I mean, like, how would you describe what the business is?
Yeah, we do engine development, and we provide racing engines for various types of racing that use, mostly Honda 4-cylinders, but we've kind of gotten into some other stuff here more recently. Our main, our main business is doing CNC cylinder heads, so that's kind of where we enjoy, are inspired the most by is just doing in-house cylinder head development, and kind of as a result of, it's grown into doing other engine stuff because customers call and you end up being their cylinder head guy. They end up buying the pieces for that, and then they want to do the rest of the engine, and then to further develop our cylinder heads, we have to do a lot of engine development. So what started as just wanting to do heads only kind of has, evolved into being a one-stop shop for engines. But we don't work on cars. We don't, it's just an engine shop. So, and we don't do general, machine work and repair. We aren't machining a crankshaft that somebody sends in or doing this. We're designing engines from the ground up and building those for a specific purpose. So that's kind of our niche.
And that's kind of, one of the great things I get to do when I do my research for the podcast is I get to go talk to people. I get to go do some research and talk. People, you hear a thing in the industry and then you kind of go do some more research. And I actually looked up Four Pistons a while ago. Someone in the racing, went like, well, if these are the guys, if you're kind of really interested in it, like you should go look into them. And unfortunately, back burner. And then it was like, I got to get one of these guys on because the stuff you make looks absolutely phenomenal. And what it looks like artwork. Like if you dissect this stuff, some of the pictures you have online on the website, it looks absolutely phenomenal. And to be able to do what you're doing, just concentrating on the engine work stuff, is kind of a testament in and of itself of the quality you're putting out, because I can't imagine that's a easy business to be self-sustaining, especially in the beginning. Let's kind of, I'm kind of vamping here a little bit, but let's kind of like go back to the beginning here and kind of talk about like what was the business when it started and how did you get it to where it is today?
Yeah. So, like most guys get started in the car industry, we just were kids wanting to go racing, and racing's expensive, and we didn't have the means to do it. We wanted to tinker with stuff. We wanted to go faster. We wanted to make horsepower. But we didn't, we had to come up with a way to do it. We couldn't just, send money off to somebody and buy engines. So we had to teach ourselves how to do it. And we grew up in the racing industry. We're in Indianapolis. We're like our place right now is surrounded by top fuel teams. And you go up to the north side of Indy and it's all the IndyCar teams. It's racing, and I grew up just right down the street from the Indianapolis 500 track. So like we were sitting in school and you could hear cars going around for the whole month of May. Racing is kind of ingrained into the culture here. So you either play basketball in Indiana or you build race cars. That's the two things that you do. And we just happen to we work on race cars. So we wanted to do it, and we started the business to kind of fund our desire to go racing. As we started doing that, and we're doing this in the garage at home. This isn't something where, we had money. We're just kids in school and just out of school trying to figure out how can we live our dream out here. And we bootstrapped it together just like any other business. You started with a couple $1,000 and just kind of tried to get it going. And it evolved from a desire to go racing into a true for engines. So we really wanted to perfect our craft. And once we started working on cylinder heads, that's where we really got kind of obsessed with engines. And believe it or not, we had actually paid someone we were building an engine, we were building it for our race car, and we had paid someone to do a cylinder head for us. And it was the most expensive piece we had in the engine. It was the critical piece. And it was like we worked so hard for this, thousands and thousands of dollars to be able to put this on our race car. And when we got it back, it was garbage. And that was it was terrible. We were so proud of it. We took it and we took it to a local engine shop down on Gasoline Alley, and we had them, put it on the flow bench, and it was terrible. So that was kind of the first thing where we said, we're not going to win unless we do our own stuff. And it's not always the case, but this just was really, something that stuck with us. So we started working in engine shops, and we had good mentors. So being in that position where you had good mentors to show you how to do things right and get you going down the right path, that's probably the biggest head start we had. So, we're pretty young and wanting to get further into engines, and just we lucked into having a really good head start with just being around the people that we were around.
Like you can't, ask for a better place to really want to get into racing, like you said, besides Indianapolis. Maybe if you actually live inside the Nuremberg ring, maybe that might be better. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
But, you're down there, it's a couple guys, you got all these great old machinists around there, and you're right, there's especially, what year was this when you're talking about where you got the cylinder heads originally?
I would say that was like late 90s, so maybe like 98, 99.
Mm-hmm.
And
I'm sorry, go on.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, so that's kind of like, there's that point right when like the internet was like becoming a thing, like when all you really had was word of mouth, and like a lot of people could get away with a lot of like crappy work back then, like just because of proximity. A lot of people didn't know any better when, especially when it comes to like higher end fabrication stuff. Like you could be the people making cylinder heads and put out just slightly better cylinder heads, and that was, okay enough to kind of get by. But in this day and age, like everyone knows everyone, and your name is kind of the most important bit. And I don't think a company that made the cylinder heads back then to that level would be able to get by today,
Correct. And we still have some of that, especially in our industry. So, we're mostly four-cylinder based. We do some GTR stuff. We do some NSX stuff. We do development for other stuff too that we don't sell. But primarily being Honda and Mitsubishi right now, we still run into engine builders that we kind of joke. We say there's a difference between engine builders and engine assemblers, and there's a lot of engine shops that aren't engine shops. If they work on cars and then they work on engines over here, and then there's still a lot of engine shops that aren't engine shops, and there's a lot of cylinder head guys that aren't cylinder head guys. Mm-hmm. And most places don't have. You had mentioned earlier that it's kind of hard to start out doing something like this and be able to make enough money to get by. It's absolutely true. You have to have a lot of really expensive equipment. And we didn't have that when we started out. We were just lucky enough to be in an area where you had a bunch of old IndyCar builders who don't build IndyCar engines anymore because of the rule changes, and in IndyCar, all private engine builders went away. So we had to lean on those guys that had that type of equipment until we could afford to buy our own. And a lot of, in our industry, we're still in its infancy. Like, there are great engine builders out there that have been building fabulous engines for 50 years. Yeah. There's in our industry, you're still kind of on the entry level racer with a lot, on a lot of things as far as budgets are concerned. But there's a lot of guys in the lower, basically the lower end side of it, and they don't get paid for the hours that they have to put that are required to put into a good engine. They're not getting paid enough, so corners get cut. It's hard to get paid for all the work that you need to put into something. So it's still kind of, I would say, in our, I don't want to say four-cylinder because you've got Cosworth and places that have built fantastic four-cylinder engines that are like legendary. And then, of course, you have, midget engine builders who've built four-cylinder engines for that type of racing that cost $65,000 for an engine. So, it's not just four-cylinder stuff. It's just kind of our industry is, what I feel is still mostly engine assemblers, where they're buying pieces off of a shelf. It's not a designed engine. It's not an engine designed for a purpose. We're going to take this because we read about it on the internet. We're going to take that because that guy has it in a catalog. And we're going to take this piece and we're going to slap it all together, and now I have a racing engine. Mm-hmm. That's what we've tried to fill. That low segment is flooded. We're trying to fill. We see that there's a need for and a want for somebody who wants a higher end and a higher developed product. Mm-hmm. And they go out and win races with it.
Well, I mean, it's, an engine to most engine assemblers is, a jack of all trades thing, whereas what you're putting together, these racing engines, these higher end performance engines, is a tool for a specific need, I guess, is to kind of summarize what you're saying. So, like, I'm taking a look at, like, some of the race teams that you have. I see some, there's drag racers in there. There's, like, pro stock guys. They're built for a purpose. I mean, when you build the engine, are you talking about horsepower figures? Are you talking about, what the car is supposed to do? I mean, obviously you have to take into account everything, I assume, but, like, what's kind of the most important thing when someone says, I need an engine for this car to do this type of racing? Like, what is kind of the most critical thing for you to know?
So, a lot of if people look at our marketing and they look at our, like, cars we are involved with, and they assume that we're mostly drag race oriented because of that we have a lot of that stuff on there, and we have a big interest in drag racing. We really do. But a majority of our work is endurance racing. And so with these race teams, all they want, they do want the most horsepower, but where in drag racing, we're fighting for 5 horsepower, and it's going to make a huge difference. And sometimes in these endurance racing types, it does too, but it really comes down to reliability, and not just reliability of the engine, but reliability of the supplier. A race team can't miss a race because an engine builder was a week behind.
Yeah.
So making sure that the team has what they need at the time that they need it so that they can be prepared, and then making sure that everything's right and tested, and that if something happens, you have a backup plan. Because the race team may not have a backup plan, but the second that you have a backup plan when they don't expect it, you've got a customer for life.
Yeah.
So
anticipating need before they know they need it that's got to be, like I can't imagine, because I've been to a couple of endurance races and I've been to some of the more informal events, and when shit goes sideways, like everyone's pissed off. So I can't imagine. I mean, I don't want to give away too much of your trade secrets here if you don't want to say about, like, but you anticipate for things to break, how do you anticipate what they need that could go wrong?
It's almost impossible to anticipate that. Now, we know what parts in an engine can see, depending on the customer, especially if they're repeat customers, what kind of things they have trouble with. Because you have a lot of things that go into these things, an endurance racing program. It's not just how much horsepower does it make and how long is it going to last. You have driver emotion. I've built engines for guys that clearly made more horsepower. Like, let's just, for example, we'll take this. I have a 2-liter Honda road race engine program that we work with, and we have developed this thing over several years, and we have an engine that absolutely made more horsepower than the engine that we built before it the first time. And so we see 15 horsepower. This is something they should feel in this car. It's a very lightweight, 900-pound carbon fiber car. The driver did not like it. It clearly made more horsepower everywhere he uses it. He thought it was slower. So you've got not only horsepower figures and things that you're trying to improve on, but the driver has to enjoy it. They have to not only enjoy it, but they have to feel it. It has to drive well. It has to be something that they have confidence in. And even if they're right or wrong, the nice thing is with really good computers, we can tell them that it's faster.
Yeah.
But you still have that factor where you're trying to convince a guy who's sitting behind the wheel that it's better, and that is a factor. And there's a lot of things that go into it. Like one of the types of racing that we do, the first questions we ask are, what's the track surface? Like, is this dirt? Is it wet dirt? Is it a winged car? Is it a non-winged car? And then, what is the length of the track? So we'll design an engine differently depending on what type of track it is. So, and everybody runs their cars different. Everybody drives different. Get into higher levels of racing where everything is where the driver is not doing the shifting. The computer's doing all the shifting. It's a little, it's a little different. It's a little easier, but you have definitely different driving styles that come into play. So, you have to make sure you design an engine for everybody's specific use, and that's where I think experience comes into play.
Mm-hmm. It's such a fascinating thing because you think about the cars and the racing and all that, and it's, people kind of talk about, to give an example, like custom made golf clubs. Like, people rant and rave all day about like their Titleist, and they got like, the driver that's like the thing's the size of like a baby, and like it hooks up and it's like custom length and all that stuff. And I'm sure it makes a difference, but there is that psychological aspect of it too, of, maybe, the guy who's driving the car, maybe he's a hard shifter, and you kind of have to take that into account. Like, I mean, when you get down to the minutia of it, I'm sure you could, if you had enough time and they were supplying you with enough money to do it, you could probably make something personalized down to like the individual aspects of all these drivers down to the minutia. But you kind of have to anticipate that just on like talking to them and being around them. I mean, that sounds like a near impossible task, and yet it seems like you do it phenomenally well. So, I mean, bravo.
It's definitely a challenge, and hey, it's not always cherries and berries either. I mean, we get it. We hit it most of the time just because we like to, under promise and over deliver. So I'd rather tell a guy that it's going to do this and then it does it just a tick better is where we want to be. And a lot of that you can change so much with the cylinder head and camshaft. An engine's a whole system, but you do a lot of the stuff later as far as working with the induction and the header and the way things work is based around the cylinder head. And that's kind of why we put our focus there, because that seems the whole engine is where the power is made. I don't want to say the cylinder head is where the power is made. Every piece of the engine is where the power is made, but the cylinder head can really dictate how it behaves. And then if you can luck into the right camshaft and some good in what I would call enlightened trial and error, and match things up right, then you can have a winner. And you got to make sure everything's happy. If the valve train's in control, that cylinder head is such a critical piece, and that's why it's in most types of racing. The cylinder head side of things is one of the most expensive pieces of an engine, at least to develop, and where people spend a lot of time. Turbocharged cars have kind of changed. Like a lot of people think in a lot of markets think that the cylinder head doesn't matter. And that's the guys that are getting their butts whipped, because the guys that are winning, they care about it. It matters more. It matters more. Yeah. You're just compounding the a lot more power, and there's a lot more power available with a proper cylinder head for a turbo car.
Well, to kind of give another analogy, it's that last step in the power delivery. It's the actual bit that gets the power from the explosion, to the crankshaft, to the wheels. It's the most critical piece. It'd be like putting Usain Bolt in flip-flops. He's not going to win. He doesn't have the right last piece. Everything else can be perfect, but if that's not there, then it doesn't work,
Right.
It's such a crazy thing to think people overlook it. And, as for me, dicking around in my garage, yeah, it's fine to overlook the, cylinder heads, because if I'm making over 150 horsepower in a goofy motor, that's fine. When you're out there and milliseconds matter, you need it. Even seconds matter. It's crazy that people overlook that. Turbocharged, you're putting so much power, so much pressure in there, and for people to think that doesn't matter, it just seems nutty to me. Have you had people come in and talk about developing an engine, and you're talking about the cylinder head, and they don't even care about it?
Absolutely, all the time.
And then what do you say to them when you're trying to implore them that they need to take a look at the cylinder head?
It depends if you're talking to the driver or a team manager, like a crew chief or something. It's like crew chief is going to understand, and it depends on the type of team. Like there's guys that sweat the details, every little detail. And sometimes I'm looking at some of the details they're looking at, aero on the car and this and that, and I'm going that ain't going to do shit. But really, it all matters, and the person that does every single thing for every 10,000th of a second, they're going to be that much further ahead, even if it was only a a couple 10,000ths of a second, something we aren't even measuring. If they do it 40 times, then they've got an advantage. So we look at cylinder heads that way, and we're always trying to change things, and it's not always about getting the most airflow. It absolutely is not, especially on these turbo cars. We can change the way the turbo spools up and what it does on gear changes and how fast it recovers and all kinds of things with the cylinder head. And a lot of it is about getting a lot of air through the thing, but it's also, typically what we see in a naturally aspirated car will work in a turbo car, just better. But there are some things that come into play depending on the size of the turbo and how much power we're trying to make. We have little 2-liter engines that make 1,500 horsepower. And the difference between the guys that are in the front of the class that are 0.2 of a second ahead, that difference isn't 20 horsepower. It's 200 horsepower.
Yeah.
So and they're all running the same turbo. They're all running the same block. They're all running the same pistons. They're all running all the same pieces, the same intake manifolds, the same exhaust manifolds. The difference is in the cylinder head and camshaft.
Mm.
So and it's literally 200, 250 horsepower difference.
Wow.
So I think that it's just that's why we were so attracted to it. And honestly, our volume kicked up. We were doing this stuff by hand, which was murder. I mean, and I have a great respect for hand porting, and I'll post up pictures and stuff of our CNC stuff, which if you've seen it, I mean, you've seen it, but other people, if they've seen it, I think we do some pretty nice CNC work. There are other people that do nice CNC work too. I think we do a good job at it, and we'll have guys get on there and say, "Oh, hand porting is the only way." You know, there is definitely. I have respect for people that do it, but we got to the point where we couldn't move our hands anymore. You can't do a cylinder head the way we do it. It'd take you 5 days to port one head. Well, I can port 5 heads in a day without blinking.
Yeah.
So, and it's very repeatable. And if a race team has something that they want, hey, this worked perfect. Well, I push a button and it comes out. So, and exactly like it was. That's the only way to do it. And there's some neat history behind that. Actually, we were trying to, expand business and trying to figure out how to make money at doing this when we were porting heads by hand. And right down the street from us was a company. They're not there anymore, but they were called WeldTech, and they invented CNC head porting. So not only did we kind of get an interesting start, when we did go to take our port designs to do CNC, we didn't just go buy CNC machines and magically start CNC, machining cylinder heads. We went to WeldTech, and just happened to be that they're right down the street from where we live, and they have more experience than anybody. In the late 80s, they invented CNC head porting, and it changed the racing industry forever. Every single thing that every other company that started selling CNC cylinder heads at one time, they were machined by WeldTech.
Wow.
All the big names. And then people started getting their own machines, and then secrets got out. There's 10 people in the world that have seen, that have seen the machines that machine those heads. It was a very well kept secret for many, many years. And then an employee sold the secrets for $10,000. Believe it or not, for a measly $10,000, this mega $1 million, multi-million-dollar deal gets put out on the street, and now everybody's doing it. So.
Got to pay them gambling debts somehow, I suppose.
That's right. So it's an interesting start, but there's a lot of history behind that, and we're proud of that history. And now that we do our own stuff and have evolved, I like that piece of history, and always cherish that. And at least there's actually a really cool history behind WeldTech. If anybody ever has the time to go read it, they should make a movie about it. It's quite an interesting story, and there's some stuff online if people want to look into it. Guy's name was Kenny Weld.
I mean, that's just a perfect Indianapolis name, to be honest.
Yeah.
It's like Scott Speed and Kenny Weld.
Yeah. And everybody's heard of Weld Wheels. It was definitely family, and this was a Kansas City company, and ended up in Indianapolis because the guy wanted to race the Indy 500. That was his dream. And he never got to do it, but. Anyway, it's an interesting story. I wouldn't go into it. It's very long, but it's a very cool history there.
I mean, it's lucked out for you because they're right down the street. So, kind of get into, how you keep up with kind of the latest and greatest technology. Did you go down and did you originally have to bring them the stuff to get ported, or did you rent out machines, or how does it work initially?
At the time, Kenny had passed away, and the business was being run by his daughter, and we We just cold walked in, and uh, you know, made a partnership. It was as simple as that, and kind of went from there. And the business has been sold, and we do our own deal now. So,
Hmm.
but it's still very much a part of our business. So it's different, but everything we do is designed by hand still. Every design is a guy walking back and forth between a downdraft table and a flow bench, for making little tweaks and designing by hand, and then it gets uh, copied, and it gets digitized, and then laid out in the program, and then it'll get tweaked even more from there. But every product starts as a guy with an air grinder in his hand.
Nice. So, like, I can't imagine going from when you began to now, kind of seeing all the changes in the industry. I mean, it's a little maybe insulated from some of the technology just because there's a lot of old, like, well, this is the way we've always done it, and that's just the way we're always going to do it, guys, there. But, like, what do you think is, like, the biggest change you've seen, like, maybe not in just the way you do it, but maybe in the way the industry is working, between when you began and now?
Man, that's actually a tough question. What I would say about the industry is that there are guys that figure stuff out and they keep it close, and they don't let it be. They don't basically advertise their findings.
Yeah.
And they never go anywhere. If no one knows, then no one knows.
Yeah.
And then there's guys that put stuff out there and make it available, and then everybody just copies it. So you have to keep moving. If you want to stay in front, you've got to keep moving. And the people that copy stuff, they're always going to be one step behind you, because they're working on stuff that you already did. So, technology wise, with regards to engines, better materials. Like right now, the materials are a lot higher quality in our industry than what they used to be.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of U.S. made stuff right now because people are demanding high quality.
Mm-hmm. You're talking about like alloys, or like
absolutely, just machining tolerances, and even the overseas stuff. Okay, it has gotten a lot better on. And when I say overseas, I'm talking like stuff that comes. People have stuff made in Taiwan, China. We don't. I'm kind of a redneck. We're proud of our stuff that's made here, but a lot of our customer base is overseas. So, a lot of the manufacturing that's happening overseas is just a lot better than it was 10 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Higher quality castings, better machining tolerances, better materials. So that's where I think most of it has been evolving, and people just using better stuff and spending more money on their engines.
Mm-hmm.
Turbo technology's come a long way. And every year it's like they improve on turbos like in a way that I can't even imagine. I'm like, last year's turbo of the same size as 100 horsepower down to this year's turbo. That's not small gains. That's huge stuff. So,
it's crazy to me. Like you go like to what turbo technology was in, the beginning of the century, and now like every small displacement, motor has one, and they'll have like dual vane and like multi-speed turbos, and like it's like this is just nuts. Like how much is just poured into that. So,
yeah, it's in 5 years. It's going to be hard to find a car that doesn't have a turbo on it. Which, from an engine builder's perspective, I hate that because we love naturally aspirated engines.
Mm-hmm.
It's like a black art now. Trying to find all motor stuff. Even Honda now, it's all turbo stuff. It's kind of taking the wind out of the sails a little bit.
Well, I mean, like a lot of the stuff you're building, like these small displacement motors, I'm imagining a lot of what you're putting together eventually has a turbocharger on it, right? Or would you say you build more turbo or non-turbo stuff?
I'd say when we sell cylinder heads, we sell more cylinder heads for turbo cars. When we build full engines, we build more engines for naturally aspirated cars.
Mm.
So there's a lot of racing classes that have displacement limits and are still naturally aspirated. And a lot of racing, not just for cost, is just I don't know. I think people are attracted to naturally aspirated, high revving engines, the sound, the feel. You cannot duplicate that in a turbo engine. You just can't. It adds a buffer. It softens things up. You don't have the vibrations and the sound and the rumble. It's just different. It's a different type of deal. I personally prefer naturally aspirated stuff, but if I go out in the garage, the stuff we're driving to work every day, whether it's my car, my wife's car, they all have turbos on them. So that's just reality. Like, you make more horsepower, and really it's more reliable in terms of, like, making 500 horsepower on a naturally aspirated four-cylinder has taken us many, many years. Making 500 horsepower, a 500 horsepower pump gas four-cylinder is a piece of cake. So, you can make a reliable car, make a lot of horsepower that way. So that's where everything's going. And that's okay.
Since we kind of touched on that, I want to bring in, I have a couple questions from listeners, and we kind of touched on it so this is Future Next Gen S2000 owner. That's his username. I don't know why he would ask this question, but he says, how far could they go horsepower in a streetable, I don't know what that means, S2000? So, we were talking about, do you build a lot of motors for, street use, first of all?
Yeah, absolutely. So naturally aspirated stuff, if you max the displacement, to the point where you can actually drive it and not beat the rod bearings out of it with big strokes, you can make about 330 horsepower on pump gas with a 2.5 liter. Like, and I say 330, like that'd be on a dyno jet with a really good engine. And everything worked out. A lot of people are going to fall short of that. That's an engine specifically designed for, something like that. And it'd be on the verge of wanting to run on E85. So if you had E85 into the mix, the 330 is no problem. The pump gas 330 is pushing things pretty far, but it could be done for sure.
Yeah. When you think about it, it doesn't sound like a lot now with, the turbochargers and everything, but that's, more than 100 horsepower per liter, which is just nuts for a naturally aspirated engine.
And really, like, driving that, having driven an S2000 with over 300 naturally aspirated, it's insane. I'll be honest. I got a twin turbo V8 out in the garage. Okay.
Yeah.
It doesn't put a smile on your face like a 300 horsepower, naturally aspirated S2000. It's just not the same. That's a very fast car. It's a very, very fast car around a road course. It's a very, very fast car to be driven. It's not going to blur your vision. Like we could throw a turbo on the thing and on pump gas, make 700 and then, put the thing on some E85 and make 900 or 1,000. And it'd be scary to drive. But realistic 300 horsepower will put a big ass smile on your face. That's a fast street car.
Yeah. That in a little 2.5 in an S2000, which doesn't weigh hardly anything. That sounds like perfection to me. I'm curious, what are you driving right now that's got the twin turbo on it?
It's a Mercedes SUV.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So itty bitty 2-liter, motors at work, and then you go home and you got yourself the biggest SUV on the planet with the big bi-turbo in it, huh?
Yeah, or I drive mostly a Duramax. I have a diesel, so it's lame. I know. It'd be nice to hear that I had something cool out in the garage, but.
Well, I'm curious then. Why did you get into the small displacement 4-cylinder stuff for the business?
Just what we had at our fingertips. I mean, if we had grown up being able to buy something different, maybe we would have. But at the time, the Honda thing was kind of starting to gain some traction. It was just starting to be popular, kind of on the West Coast, and there were a couple guys in town that were older than us when we were kids that had some pretty cool cars. They had, uh, you know, they did it right, and we started going to races and stuff, and just being around people that were interested in that stuff. And we were fortunate enough that they weren't taking us to car shows. They started taking us to races when we were kids,
Yeah.
and we were going to races before we could drive, and that just kind of got us into it. We had Honda motors sitting in the garage. That's what we started working on, and we still race Hondas. Like I say, that stuff's out in the garage. I got 3 race cars in the shop. They're Hondas. We don't race anything else. I raced Evos for a while, which I love. We still have Evos. Still have an Evo. So I say that's what's out in the garage. That's just what gets me to the shop and back. We have definitely other cars.
Was that was 3 or 4 race cars in total that like the shop has? Like, or are you talking?
Yeah, we have several, and then we have some Evos too, and just we have to have platforms to test stuff on. So, and of course, this automotive thing is a disease, so you can't stop at one.
No,
it only gets worse.
Mm-hmm. No, like we were saying beforehand, like I have the same sort of disease with cars my wife has with dogs, which is like, oh, that one looks like no one's paying attention. Let me just go over and get that. Same thing in the automotive world. I'm like, oh, that no one cares about that car over there, right? I'll just go, adopt it. I'll rescue it. It's not. I didn't buy a car. I rescued a car. I think that's how we need to start phrasing it.
Right.
So you got a couple. So you got some Hondas you race. You got the, the Mitsubishi Evos. You have those kind of just laying around, just in case, just to test some engines on, and then.
Yeah, and we like I used to do SCCA stuff, and it's not anything I got serious into. I ran a couple national tour events, but mostly just local, because some of this competitive racing stuff will kind of get to you a little bit. You start taking it too seriously, and like our Honda stuff, they're like, we have tube chassis alcohol drag race cars. I mean, you're not going to go jump in that thing and blow off some steam.
No.
It's a whole freaking ordeal every time you get in it. And they're, sometimes you got to have a car to go blow off some steam. So Evos are good for that. You can go blow off steam anywhere you want. And I really enjoyed the SCCA thing for a while, till I started getting my butt whipped by a buddy of mine who eventually ended up winning 2 national titles. And that was the end of. I got tired. I didn't want. It wasn't fun anymore once he started kicking my ass that bad.
It's always fun when you're winning, not so much when you're.
That's right.
It's worse that it's a friend too, because if it was just some stranger, it'd just be like, I don't have to deal with that guy. But since it's a friend, it's like, I'm tired of seeing you win. Damn it,
Yeah. And then Josh, he's got a badass Evo, and he doesn't even. He drives it like a pussy. I mean, it'll be the only Evo that'll go like 300,000 miles and never have an engine rebuild, because I don't know that he's hit the gas this month in that thing.
He just lets the clutch.
It's got all kinds of power. He just doesn't do it. I had to get my jabs in on that.
Yeah, that's hilarious. Just lets the clutch out, leaves it in first, and just idles all his way into work. That's hilarious.
That is it.
I mean, is it one of those things, where he enjoys the technical aspect of it, but maybe he doesn't really care for the visceral aspect of it?
Yeah, I mean, he's very loyal to Honda, except for the fact that if you want a nice car that's got a lot of power and is practical, at the time, you got the new Type R coming out. It's definitely more powerful, and so we're getting older, so driving around with your girlfriend and the kids and stuff, or your wife and your kids, in a Honda Civic that doesn't have interior and no radio and rides like crap, it's appealing to us, but it doesn't appeal to them. So you got to get into something else, and Evos are good for that. They're fun.
Yeah.
But they're and a lot of other cars, not just those. Those just happen to be what we got into.
Mhm.
Um,
I
but
mean,
yeah,
there's not. I mean, I can't imagine. I don't want to bash on them in case you end up building for them, but like Subarus are fine. You know, they make a competitor to the Evo, but from an engine aspect, that boxer motor, I can't imagine as an engine builder that's something desirable to drive around daily.
it's a little. Well, I'll tell you what, they're easier to work on. Let me put it that way. Evos aren't fun to work on. The Subarus are easier to work on, in my opinion, as far as like if you start breaking drivetrains, you got to take an engine out. You're going to do it a lot faster in a Subaru. And we're getting like that's our next on our development plate is Subaru stuff.
Mm.
Um, yeah, it's not my favorite. It's a little weird,
Mm.
but there's a big following, and not just a big following. There's some things that those cars do great. Uh, eh, you know, and they definitely sell a lot of them. So
Yeah.
it's not anything we want to overlook. I don't know that I want to build engines for them, but I definitely want to do cylinder heads.
Yeah. I mean, when it comes to the cylinder head, though, with it being in a boxer where you have gravity playing on one, you know, in a normal car it's playing on one axis. In a, 2 liter, it's up and down, and gravity's pulling at the bottom. You don't have to worry about it kind of like dragging on one edge inside the cylinder. You know, for a Subaru, is that a big consideration that you have the cylinders kind of laying in there?
There's a lot of honestly, I think there's so much that can be improved on in Subaru engines, and that's really why we're interested.
Mm.
A lot of these guys have problems. Guys are buying cars and they start hurting engines like right away. So it's not if they're left factory, but when guys start pushing stuff, and um, it's just one of those things that. And there's a lot of good companies out there that are doing Subaru stuff, so they have options now. But I think we can do better, and if we can do better, then I think we'll have a little piece of it, and maybe people will see the value in what we do. Um, I'm anxious to tackle that project just because it's new, and
Yeah.
it wouldn't be the first time we've worked on them. I've worked on them. It wouldn't be the first time I worked on a Boxer. Um, we've done Subaru stuff back in the day. It's just not something we ever specialized in. But yeah, I'm looking forward to it, honestly.
I get you. So, before we kind of get into maybe some of the like listener questions and some of the random questions I have for you, if someone is thinking about, having an engine built, or if they're thinking about replacing, their cylinder heads, or they don't know what they want to do with the car, but they know they want to get, better performance or something out of it, and they want to come to you and have you look at it. I mean, someone wants to approach you, like, what's the best way to get a hold of you, and kind of like, I don't know. I have a question I'm trying to phrase in my head, but why don't you tell us how we get a hold of you first, and while I try and figure out what the heck I want to phrase this question like.
Yeah, best way. I mean, we do a lot of stuff on Facebook. That's how we built our business, was on Facebook and Instagram. And so Facebook, like the business page messenger works well. We try to keep up with that really well. Email's better, but a lot of people don't know what email is anymore, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Phone call. I mean, we try to answer the phone the best we can, and we're probably going to be growing with, in that department. But I tell you what, man, we had people answering the phone at one time, and people don't want to talk to someone who answers the phone. They want to talk to me, or they wanted to talk to Josh, or they wanted to talk to Matt. So they want to talk to the engine builder. So we're still at that point where we're trying to figure out what the next step is going to be as far as getting people the time that they require to feel comfortable about what they're doing. So we try to put as much info out there as we can. We post several times a day on social media showing what we're doing. We try to answer questions on there, and we try to put as much as we can on our website so that there's some resources so that people come to us. By the time they come to us, they know what they want. Most of the time. And the thing is, we have enough business at that right now that, we can kind of be choosy with what we're going to take.
Mm-hmm.
So for the most part, we want people to have somewhat of a plan, at least know what kind of racing am I doing, or driving, what kind of driving am I doing, and what are my goals, and then biggest thing, like budget. If somebody comes and says, I want to make 400 horsepower naturally aspirated, and I need it to go in my street car and last this long, I got $3,000. Be educated on it. It's a $15,000 engine. Don't come. It's just we deal with that a lot.
Mm-hmm.
So, and then on the other side of things, most of our customer base is really educated, and it's really nice. Like, especially the Honda guys are really at least our customer base are really on top of things. So they have and everybody is with the age of information. It's all at your fingertips. But occasionally we get a few people that just you really do some hand holding with, but those guys aren't going to buy anything.
On the flip side of that, if someone is listening, maybe they're getting the impression like, oh, all these guys do is build engines. There's parts, there's stuff available. You sell the cylinder head, you sell like a lot of stuff on there. Like, if someone were to come to you, they're running a Honda motor, they're running a Mitsubishi motor, or one of these small displacement things, and you could recommend one upgrade to get from y'all. Like, what do you think is like the biggest thing they could do to upgrade their engine?
It's hard to say, man. It just really, everything revolves around the cylinder head. So, cylinder head and cams. If you aren't getting into the engine, obviously cams, induction. If you're not going to get into doing heads, but you can take stock blocks and make all kinds of horsepower cylinder heads. So, I don't want to sound like I'm pushing guys that way just because that's what we do, but it really is where what separates kind of the guys that are going to be making good power and the guys that don't. So, but each case is unique. We try to give everybody personal attention. So, and real answer is not just when somebody emails me, I try to sit down and really, do something that's going to fit them right, not just trying to make a sale, because we got plenty of work. We have the luxury of having plenty of work. We got past that hard point in business where you're fighting the cash flow thing and trying to figure out what you're going to do next, and how do we, what is our best next investment? What do we do? Now we're at this point, we're kind of having fun. So, we lucked in, we got lucky a couple times, and now we're in a position where we get to show up to work and have fun every day and really take care of people best we can.
And that's what's like, so, I mean, the best way to say that, you guys do good work is that you guys are always in work. Like, it doesn't matter. You can say whatever you want, but the fact that you all are so good at what you do is because, like, the easiest way to prove it is that you all get to pick, be a little picky about who you get to take business from, which is great.
Right. Honestly, people I think would be, if people knew how much fun we had at work, I think people would be pretty pissed. I mean, like some of the stuff we get to show up at work and do, like, it's not always like that, man. Sometimes you go into a situation, and that's one of the things, like, if I can give anybody advice who's trying to start their own business or getting into this, there's going to be small things that come along that, like, oh, this guy said this, or that, one person said this or one person said that, and it's going to drag you down for 3 days. Do not let things distract you from your end goal, and keep moving forward and stay positive and do the right thing every time. Do the right thing every single time, even if it costs you now. You always have to do the right thing, and you always have to be honest with people. And if you do that, everything will fall into place. And the one guy when you become popular, especially, you're going to have people that are trying to drag you down because they're seeing your success, and they're going to envy that, and they're going to beat on you. And if you let it eat at you, you are distracted. So that's the biggest thing. My grandpa always used to say, don't sweat the petty stuff and don't pet the sweaty stuff. And It's stupid, but I try to keep that in mind. Not to sweat the small things and just keep moving forward and love your job and do your best at every time you do it.
Yeah. I mean,
it's a lot easier to do when you get over that financial threshold of being able to, where you're fighting cash flow problems,
yeah,
which all businesses do.
Yeah. I mean, it's like anything. You kind of have to, a business is almost like a person where you have to prove that you're worth the person's time and all that. And that's great advice. I love it. I can't, I mean, for someone who maybe is trying to get into the business of, messing with engines in particular, do you have any advice for them?
Yeah, absolutely. Get to know your tools. Use the proper tools. If you're going to be an engine builder, you have to use tools that engine builders use. Otherwise, you're not doing it right. And you're going to you could go work for engine builder A and engine builder B, and they could teach you two totally different ways. But one thing that is going to remain the same is the tools that are used and the way that people take measurements. And you have to become detail oriented. And you have to be thinking while you're putting stuff together. It's not just putting stuff together. And also designing engines and putting them together is two different things. Like I said earlier, the assembly part of it, the assembly is the quick part, man. That's the easy part.
Mm-hmm.
All the work is, by the time the engine is being put together, all the work is already done.
Yeah. Well, like you said, you said there's a difference between engine assembler and engine builder. I almost want to say you guys are more engine engineers than you are, builders. There's so much design work. There's so much, attention to detail as to what you do that like builder doesn't quite, cover all or an engine artiste maybe. I don't know. There's so much going into it when you see, because we'll post some of the stuff too, pictures and stuff on the article for people who are listening. There's so much, it looks like works of art. It honestly does. And you can tell it's so detail oriented looking at it.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that's kind of given us a boost too, is that we're in a market where everybody's going in and trying to undercut on price, and we stuck to our guns on the price because if I'm going to put 60 hours into an engine, I'm going to get paid for 60 hours.
Yeah. And
a lot of guys are barely, they're just cutting that in half to try to get business, and you have to. When you're not known and you're new, you gotta. Engine builders put more time in than they get paid for. We already went through it.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of these engines, you'll see, especially in our market, the engines look like hell, man. You go spend $10, $12, $15,000 on an engine, and it looks like it came off the bottom of the ocean. There's a freaking problem. I don't care what parts are on the inside. If the engine builder was willing to let that thing look like that, where you're going to see on the outside, where you're going to see it, what does the inside look like that you can't see? Yeah. What got skipped? What was forgotten? What was like, yeah, screw it, I don't have time for that shit. If they're willing to let you see it looking like hell, what about the parts that you can't see? So we look at this as like, every project is our own, and we want to be proud of it. And if that engine goes straight to the customer and they take that engine apart, we want it to be perfect. And we don't want anything for anybody, to see anything and question it. We want it to be right and to always have a good, basically this is why we did this. This is the way that this is. And it is like model building to us. Mm-hmm. I don't want to glamorize it too much, but because, there's some simplicity in engine building too. Like physically putting an engine together is not that hard. Okay. It's make sure your stuff is clean, make sure you measure the shit right and put it together properly. It's not terribly difficult. It's just having a routine and having a checklist. Yeah. No matter how good you are, go through your checklist. Did I do everything? Absolutely. But all the important stuff is in the prep work. Mm-hmm. Like, there's horsepower. There's horsepower in prepping the parts and cleaning the parts and all that stuff and being clean. Really produces good, long-lasting engines.
I love that quote just there. There's horsepower in prepping the parts. I mean, that's such a perfect explanation. I mean, it kind of brings me to a question I kind of want to, from one of the listeners, where Umbo Trumbo asks, and I'll, try and shorten up a little bit, but they watch a lot of engine rebuilding stuff. They see a lot of care put into measuring, machining everything for optimal balance and, perfect clearances and all that. But, does that attention to detail go into the mass-produced engines? There's acceptable tolerances, but how loose are some of those blocks engines from the factory? Like, I'm sure the stuff you're getting in is not even close, right?
You might be surprised. That's one of the things.
Really?
I mean, 10 years ago, our, was stuff sloppy? Yeah. Do OEMs get sloppy? Yeah, they still do, but they're getting better. They have to be better. You can't even buy a crappy car anymore.
That's true.
I mean, they're all good. Some are better, some are too complex. But things are getting better. Manufacturing processes are getting better. Is a hand-built engine better? I mean, I think so. We're engine builders. I love hand-built engines.
Yeah.
Do they screw up mass-produced engines? Absolutely. I mean, huge manufacturers had piston rings upside down. Like, this is basic stuff. Over 50,000 cars go out with a piston ring upside down. That's a freaking problem. And that comes from some of the highest, some of the most revered engine companies in the world that happens. So, and there's some design issues too that they don't run into. It's just, there are some things, but a custom built race engine in a race engine shop will have more attention to detail and more care and more, you take a piston out of a box, it's not ready to go in an engine. You take a rod out of a box, it's not ready to go in an engine. But man, there's some really cool stuff that some of the OEMs are doing on new cars that they're putting some neat stuff in engines and even coatings and things like, look at a Dodge Hellcat has DLC coated wrist pins in it. That's something that a lot of people don't even know about yet. People that are in the engine world do. You'd see that in a car that has a lot of vacuum and is pulling, has a dry sump on it, it's pulling oil away from the pin. We use DLC pins in a lot of stuff, but it's expensive. But that's in an OEM car. It's pretty cool.
Well, what is a DLC pin? I don't even know.
It's diamond-like coating. So. Diamond-like coating is a really cool coating that you'll see Formula One use it in various places too. But everybody's using it now. It's more readily available. But like even we put in most engines aren't going to get something like that. That's not really needed. But that engine Dodge felt was being pushed hard enough where that was going to matter. And, hollow stem valves, sodium filled valves to help with heat. It's pretty cool. And I just picked that car as an example just because it's probably one that you didn't expect me to talk about. But there are OEMs that are doing some pretty neat stuff these days. Honestly, the domestic cars, I would say they're leaning on stuff a little harder as far as putting cool stuff in engines.
Well, like the muscle car wars are back, so they kind of have to at this point, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you're seeing titanium rods, titanium valves. I guess that's 10-year-old stuff now to them in the OEM stuff, but you don't typically see that. You're not going to find that stuff in a lot of the other cars. The GTR is a cool engine. It's got, that 6-cylinder is a neat engine, but it doesn't have anything like that in it. It does have it has some pretty neat stuff on inside the cylinder head. So, but turbo's the equalizer for everybody. So,
Now here's an interesting one. I'll try again. This is a long ass question here. Snack Times, I guess is the guy's name. And there's a couple of letters, numbers in there when there shouldn't be. I'll try to summarize this one real fast. But basically, he's pulling an old engine out of an old AMC. He's got it's a 4.2 liter straight six. He's new to the engine building. He wants to know, keep it naturally aspirated. What is maybe something to do to it? I know we talked about camshaft. We talked about cylinder heads to increase power from that. Do you think upgrading a fuel injection would do better, or do you think the going from a carb to fuel injection would do better, or do you think cam and cylinder heads would do more for that?
Well, it just depends on the carburetor. Yeah, there's a lot of guys that'll argue that carburetors are perfectly fine and better, but you can always make more power with fuel injection. Mm-hmm. At least throughout the entire power band and being consistent. I don't know. Naturally aspirated engines are I don't want to say they're easy, but maximize displacement, maximize compression, and get air through the thing. So naturally aspirated power is not doing one thing. It's doing all of it. That's the bad part about it. That's why people bolt on forced induction, because it's easy. But naturally aspirated, you have to kind of do all of it. There's not one thing. So the nice thing about it is that you do one thing, and then later when you get to the funds, you do another thing, and then you do another thing, and you kind of add on to it. But I would sit down. If I was going to do a naturally aspirated engine, I'd sit down and do all the things that I'd love to do if I didn't have a budget, and then figure out which pieces you can do along the way as you get the money, and build up to that, I guess, to a point. Yeah. Well, that's the reality for a lot of people. Not everybody can just go say, okay, I'm just going to go toss, $15,000 into this thing and hope that it works.
Well, if you were to, someone's going to tear down an engine and then rebuild it, an old engine, do you think if they can only spend the money on one part, do you go for cylinder head? Do you go for porting? Do you go for, crankshaft? If it was, I know that's kind of a hard question because it depends on the engine, but.
Yeah, first thing, induction and cam.
Yeah, okay.
I mean, that's the easier stuff to do, and it's not always the easiest thing to pull the engine apart. Like, it really depends on a case-by-case basis. If you're working with an engine that's got 190,000 miles on it, and the rings are toast, and the there's not a lot left in the block as far as the hone, the thing's going to need rebuilt. So put your money there and start there, and then you can always bolt a cylinder head on the top of it. But if the thing's healthy, start with induction and cams, and then move into the cylinder head. There's so much power right there. I mean, induction head and cams, lots of power there.
I'm curious. This just kind of entered my mind. What is your feeling on nitrous?
Oh, it's awesome.
I mean, I'm curious if there has to have been someone who walked into the shop after blowing up an engine on nitrous, right?
Yeah, me. I put a 200 shot on my Evo. I mean, it's fun stuff. It's great. Nitrous is something that feels different than anything else. It's instantaneous torque. It's the lower you spray it, the more torque it makes, which seemed to be the problem with my Evo. I was racing a 1,000-horse Supra, and I sprayed it too low. He kept brake boosting and pulling the RPM down, and I hit it with that base shot, and it said no. Nitrous is fun. It's just all about controlling combustion. You got a lot of oxygen in there. It's going to get really hot, so you got to have good materials. Up to, even on a 4-cylinder, 100 shot isn't shit. You get past that, and you're starting to throw a lot of stuff in the cylinder. So Really, small shots, you don't feel much. You don't feel a 50 shot, unless it's a really, really light car. I got to the point where I really didn't feel 100, so
You have to keep chasing that high. Yeah, I get it.
yeah, it's just it's addictive, and you got to be careful because it's easy to get greedy. But nitrous is great. It's real expensive. People used to do it because it was cheap, and it's not cheap. It's expensive as hell. You're gonna blow through bottles, and then you're gonna smack an engine when you're going to. If you're disciplined, it can last quite a while. It's just being disciplined is really, really hard when it's a jet change away.
Yeah.
So you want to make sure you have even distribution and good fueling. Make sure, there's a lot of ways that you can make nitrous live instead of just buying a bolt-on kit and just saying, here, let's throw it at it. And, because a lot of these intake manifolds on cars don't feed fuel and air evenly. At least air. So if you have a single nozzle spraying fuel or spraying nitrous and fuel, you might have two cylinders getting 25% more of the stuff. So you just gotta keep that in mind. I would say up to 100 shot, you can hit it with a single nozzle. Past that, you need to be looking at something different, getting more direct path to a more controlled environment.
Well, I could sit here and pick your brain all day. I think I'm absolutely fascinated by all this, but we're a little bit over on time, and I know it's getting late, so I'm going to run through here. I have a list of questions that I'd like to describe as inside the actor's studio-esque, but for the automotive world, because this is the podcast of record, of course, for the automotive world, or so I like to believe. So these are just kind of quick response things. Don't think about them for too long. So you'll kind of figure it out as we kind of go along here. So what is your favorite car?
Oh, you told me not to take a long time.
I know this one's a hard one to do right off the bat. So,
NSX.
NSX. We'd like to get that gut feeling from it. That's a good choice. I appreciate that. What is your least favorite car?
Mustang.
Ooh, that's an interesting one. Any particular version of the Mustang? Or just all of them?
Okay, I could have a GT350. I kind of want one, okay? But past that, all of them. That car's got a beautiful engine in it.
It's flat tappet cams. I'm sure that's like some sort of like auto-erotic thing for you, I'm sure. Let's see here. What modification trend? So we're talking about like donk, stance, lifted trucks, whatever. Do you find is like appealing to you?
Appealing.
Or you could say appealing that turns you on. It doesn't need to be a logical thing, but it's emotional.
Probably like off-road stuff, Jeeps. I like that. That's pretty cool.
Okay, that's a good one. Like the off-road stuff. I get that. Can't do a lot of that in Indianapolis, unfortunately. But what modification trend turns you off? So again, donk, brodozer, stance, that sort of stuff.
Drifting. I don't get it. I don't get it.
Do you build an engine for any drift cars?
We did. We used to. Actually, yeah, we just built one this year. That's how much I cared about. It was actually a really nice engine build, and the customer was awesome. I just don't get. It's like a bikini contest to me. There's no winner. It's just judges. I mean, it's not racing.
I get you.
Yeah.
What car do you dread to be stuck behind at a red light?
Oh, a Prius.
It's so far that
they're watching that meter, man. They're watching that meter not getting into the gas.
It's so true. Let's see here. What automotive sound or noise do you love?
Well, I like to hear a good turbo, even though it's not my. I don't know. I'd probably like to hear a turbo.
What automotive sound or noise do you hate? Like it could be anything automotive, so like even like brake squeal, like that's like what we're talking.
Yeah, Definitely most hated would be some kind of engine noise of metal clanking around, because that usually means that I'm going to be getting dirty, and it happens.
Yeah, I bet it does. What profession other than your own in the automotive world would you like to try?
Oh, I have a little history in the funeral industry, in the death care industry, so I have a little bit of background in that actually. So maybe there.
Mm. Uh, what profession in the automotive world would you not want to do?
In the automotive world,
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't want to be like a lube tech. I don't like working on cars. I hate working on cars because they're dirty. Cars come in dirty.
Yeah.
Engines are clean.
All right. And then, what is your automotive pet peeve?
Um,
To give an example, a lot of people say left lane hogs, maybe loud music. Just what is the thing that makes you irrationally angry when
being in the passenger seat.
I appreciate that 100%.
And that comes with old age. I used to not care, but now I go nuts when somebody else drives.
Mm-hmm.
And I used to not care, but I don't know what it is. The older I get, the more I have to be holding the steering wheel.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, if I'm not drunk, I shouldn't be in the passenger seat. That's just how that works. And then the final question. This one, I hope you thought long and hard about it. What do you think the hardest food to eat while driving is?
Meatball sub.
Meatball sub. That's a good one. Any particular restaurant or just in general?
I would say a Subway. I was thinking about some other stuff like fajitas would be hard, spaghetti would be hard, but I've never attempted that. A meatball sub I have attempted, and it always ends up in your lap.
Mm.
So
yeah, that's a new front runner in the case, because I've actually never attempted. It's one of the few times you've actually stumped me on this, because typically this turns into stupid shit I've done in cars. Yeah, I've actually never tried a meatball sub in a car, so I don't know. That's a pretty good one.
You'll probably try it once, and that's that.
Yeah, I don't care that much about my pants. That's pretty much how that goes down.
Yep.
So let's go ahead and tell people they can go to 4Pistons. So it's the number 4 pistonracing.com. That's the website.
Yes, sir.
What's the Facebook account?
It's 4Piston. So go to facebook.com/4Piston.
Okay, and spelled the same way. Number 4 piston. Right.
Yep, Piston, no S on the end, just Piston, 4Piston.
All right. Is there any other social media people can follow you all on?
Yeah, Instagram, 4Piston Luke and 4Piston Josh. We post kind of more behind the scenes stuff, personal stuff. Not a lot of personal stuff, but like you'll see, people doing stuff that we're not posting on the Facebook page. Some of the dirty work, some of the stuff we don't, that's not marketing stuff. That'll be like somebody cutting their finger off or, working on an engine part that sucks.
Yeah.
You might get a little more behind the scenes stuff on there.
Mm-hmm. It definitely worth a follow. Definitely worth. If you're thinking about doing anything to an engine, especially like small displacement stuff, definitely check them out. Yeah. Any closing words before we kind of wrap this up for the evening?
No, just check us out, and even if you're not into the stuff that we're doing, we have some technically relevant things that we like to discuss, and live feeds, and kind of showing behind the scenes, and burning things down on the engine dyno, literally sometimes. Slightly entertaining to some people.
Mm-hmm. All right, Luke, just hold on one second. I'm going to say goodbye to you off there. Everyone listening, I'll be right back.